is our second session, unpacking, as Pastor has already said, core teachings that represent the important repositioning of our theological platform in recent years. Where do we go from here? How are we building on from this as a community? Okay. So the first session was the gospel of the kingdom, and this session is the king of the kingdom. Okay, so let's kind of like transition, therefore, because this was done in a sort of coherent manner in terms of how we planned this series. So we dealt with the kingdom last week. That Yeshua came to, I said Yeshua came, but Yeshua preached the gospel of the kingdom. He preached it, his cousin preached it, his disciples preached it, and this was all before Jesus died and rose again. We was looking at this last week. And we understood that this kingdom is a real political kingdom. It'll be a real political kingdom with real political aspects, real social aspects, real spiritual aspects, okay, as well. That will, what's the word I'm looking for? That will invade into this world, and has been invading into this world for the last 2,000 years. The kingdom has already begun to arrive, but we are waiting for it to manifest in its fullness, which we believe to be at the return of the King, at the return of the Messiah. So it's a real kingdom is the idea. So the transition is pretty straightforward from the kingdom to the king of that kingdom. Now, I'm taking it for granted that we all believe here that Yeshua, Jesus, is king. Yes? All right, okay. So this is the question. I've asked this question in other studies that I've done as well. So this is the question I want to throw out there. It's a very, very simple question. We believe Jesus is king. Why is he king? What qualifies Yeshua as king? And this is, speak out to me. This is Q&A. Such as? Prophecy. Yeah, okay. So for those who are listening in, who might not have heard that, one of the members of our congregation, who remain unnamed, spoke well and said that he replied with prophecy. Okay, so prophecy. So that there were ancient prophecies, and this is true, and this is actually a very good point. There are ancient prophecies that predate the time period that we know and refer to as the first century of the Common Era, which is the time period of which Yeshua was born, lived, and he was raised and lived, and what we see in the so-called Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There were ancient prophecies that from dating from hundreds of years before that predicted that there would be a king, okay? I.e. Messiah. That's what we mean when we say Messiah, when the New Testament says Messiah, that's what it means, okay? So that there would be a king of a kingdom, and this is prophesied. And do you know what? Danny just said something. Oh, I just gave away the name. Anyways. So it was just mentioned that in these prophecies, not only did it predict that there would be a king, but it specified, the attributes, all right? So there were specifications of where the king would be born, for instance, and things like that. I'm not going to say any more because the question still remains not completely answered for me, okay? So yes, prophecy is good. There are prophecies that are written, but those prophecies that were written and that we have in the so-called Old Testament, in Isaiah, Jeremiah, those prophecies themselves, by themselves, don't confirm or validate that Yeshua is the Messiah. What qualifies Yeshua as king? Right, so we've heard another response is his genealogy and his lineage. Basically the same way of saying the same things. Precisely. In fact, that is how, are we aware that's how the New Testament starts? Right? This isn't, I haven't got this here, we don't need to bring it up, but if you want to take a quick look for yourself, this is how the so-called New Testament, which many Christians think is superior to the first section of the Bible, which is not true, but if we want to play that game, in the perceived superior section of the Bible, which is not, it starts with the first thing it gets across to you is the genealogy of Jesus. Okay, before it even gets into the story, before it gets into his birth, his life, the things that he did, the activities, his mission, and his reputable and well-known execution, death, and, as we believe, resurrection, it starts off with his genealogy. It's the first thing. It's the first thing. Now, that's it. The reason why that's important, and that is important, it is the lineage of Yeshua. It's the lineage of Jesus. It's his ancestry that makes him king. That's not just, I hope we know that's not just exclusive to Yeshua. That's how pretty much, in most circumstances, anybody is qualified as a king. Is that not true in this country as well? Okay, so when the Bible uses words like this, it's talking to us in our language. God is communicating to us. So it could have said governor, there's going to be a governor. To be a governor, you don't have to have a particular lineage. All right? To be a politician, it could be this is a coming MP. And this MP is going to change the world. That's good news. That's great. But the MP doesn't need to have a particular lineage. They just need to be voted in by the society, into that station, into that position. King, though, is a different ballgame. So when the Bible uses the term king, it's talking in terms that are common to our understanding. Okay? So this isn't something, it's not spiritual or religious and something like really deep. This is really just very basic social realities. Okay? So that's key. It's his lineage. Can we be even more specific? So we believe Jesus is the king of the kingdom. So what is it about Yeshua's lineage? Like, who is he, therefore, connected to? You'd have to be connected to a king, isn't it? That's the idea. Yeah? You have to be related to a king in order to be king. Right? So I think the answer's already there. Someone call it out for me. David, right? That's why Jesus referred to, he's given the appellation Son of David, okay? All right, cool. Now, I asked this in a separate Bible class and study that I do outside of this community, and it's where I start sometimes because I'm really trying to get people thinking, all right? Because I wasn't thinking these things years ago. You just grew up and just like Santa Claus is just there, Jesus is just there. I was born into this. I didn't ask the questions. Jesus is king. I sing it every Sunday. All right? And I believe it to be true, but I didn't really understand what was involved. Okay? So I asked this question, and some of the answers would be, well, because he's God. Of course he's king. He's God. Does God make you king? That doesn't seem to make much sense to me, and it's not what the apostles presented. Okay, and at the end of the day, these things are in our Bible. They are in our Bible, so we are implicitly agreeing that this whole discussion is very, very important. Well, do we believe that Jesus' kingship is important? Is that trivial? Is it like, let's just come and do our thing, every week, every Sunday, and we don't really need to get into that. I do believe there are some churches, there are some Christian groups who feel that way. This is we don't need to get into that. That's all deep theology. Let the theologians discuss that. Let's just come and just etc. Was that the perspective of the organization that we've joined into? This legacy of disciples going back to Yeshua. Is this trivial? Is this trivial information? It's not trivial. It's not true. As I said, the New Testament starts off by presenting that Jesus is related to two individuals. All right, it goes to give his genealogy in Matthew chapter 1, but before it goes into the genealogy completely, it pulls out two individuals from the genealogy it's about to present, and it says to you that Jesus is a descendant of David and Abraham. And two of those, we're not talking about the Abraham aspect today, but his connection and his ties to David are key. All right, so the reason why Jesus is king is because he is a descendant of David. Okay, if he wasn't a descendant of David, he could have been a great man. He could have been many other great things, but he would not be, as Danny said, he wouldn't be the Messiah king that was awaited, because there were specific predictions that set the criteria so that when the time would come and when the person would come, people would be able to know, is it or is it not? Does it meet the mold? Does it fit the template? No, that person is a false person. Let's not rally behind them, because that's going to lead to something that we don't really want to get into. This is where it is. God already gave the clues and some of the insights beforehand, so that when the king came onto the scene, we would be able to assess. Or when someone comes into the scene claiming to be the king, or when someone comes into the scene and people are saying that this person is the king, individuals are able to assess that. And that was what the Jewish community would have to have done in the time of Jesus. Okay, so let's progress forward. So, who is this king? We already know it's Jesus, Yeshua. Okay, but what else can we know about this king? All right, and that's the essence of what today is about. Okay, knowing the king. All right, we want to establish a better sense of our understanding and relationship thereby to the king of the coming kingdom. All right, getting a sense of what's important, and that's what we're kind of looking at today, and I hope that will begin to take shape and form with significance and relevance to us as we move forward. So we want to talk about knowing the king. Okay, let's ask ourselves a few questions. Let's consider things like this. Let's try that again. Is that you? Did you do that? Was that me? Okay, cool. Okay. All right. How much of what Yeshua taught do we teach? This is part of our sense of asking ourselves. Let's consider, how well do we know the king? Okay. How much of what Yeshua taught do we teach? How much of what Yeshua instructed do we obey? I want you to think percentage. Think percentage, all right? How much of what Yeshua believes, notice my tense, by the way. I was going through this. I was like, nope, I'm going to change the tenses. All right, it's technical. But I didn't want to just put what Yeshua believed, because I believe and I'm convinced that he is still alive. I say still alive is that he did die, but he came back from the dead. The only other person to have done that and never died again. So Yeshua is alive for me today. Okay? So Yeshua believed things and continues to believe things as we are speaking today. And I'm speaking about Yeshua in this way because this is the kind of way that I don't think many have considered Yeshua. All right? So how much of what Yeshua believed things? Yeshua had beliefs. So how much of what Yeshua believes do we believe? How much of what Yeshua stood for do we stand for? Yeah? So how much, what did Jesus stand for? What kind of things would he be like, nah, that's not cool? What kind of things would he be like, yes, definitely, we must? How much of that, what are those things, and how much of that do we stand for? How much of what he stood for do we stand for? How much of what Yeshua did do we do? There was a slogan back in the 90s, WWJD, bracelets, T-shirts, the whole memorabilia. What would Jesus do? Great statement. Great statement. I think it's one of the best statements that I think that modern Western Christianity has brought to the table of religious discussion, all right, when it comes to Jesus. What would Jesus do? That kind of gets to the heart of discipleship, that question. It's an awesome question, going through your day thinking, what would Jesus do? I mean, I could bring it home. I could go through my day and think, what would a dealer do in this situation? Do you know what I mean? Like, I really respect a dealer's wisdom and insight. How would she approach and how would she navigate this situation? Now, can I do that without familiarity with Adelia? In any real sense of the, is that possible? No. All right, so I'm just trying to bring this really just down to very, its simplest form of understanding, okay? So how much of what Yeshua did we do? So, yeah, we should be about, what would Jesus do in this situation? All right, what would Jesus do? But then we can ask ourselves the question now. How much of what Yeshua did that's recorded in the Gospels and that is implied in the records of the Gospels, how much of what Yeshua did do we do? How many parables of his can we recall at any given moment? Just how many of his parables and how much of his teaching informed our choices and actions throughout this pandemic? I'm bringing this close context. So as we went through, because I could say our entire life, it's fine too, I could say today, but throughout this pandemic, as we were navigating the situation, how often did we ask ourselves, does Yeshua's parables speak on this situation? Like how I approach this situation that I'm facing now throughout the pandemic. And there's various different things that came to light throughout the pandemic, various different conversations. I'm not just talking about the virus and all those things. Black Lives Matter, other political uprisings and so on and so much. Does Yeshua's parable speak into the situation? Whilst people were social distancing and maybe didn't have access to things. Does Yeshua's parables speak into this situation? Which one? What does it instruct me to do? Yeshua said this in Luke 6, verse 46. Why do you call me Lord and not do what I say? So in other words, Yeshua is communicating this. You claim to recognize who I am, so why doesn't that recognition affect what you do? So you claim to recognize that I'm Lord, that I'm the Messiah, that I'm the King, that I'm God's servant, God's agent, that I'm a prophet, that I'm a rabbi. We'll look at these things. So why doesn't that recognition affect what you do? Okay. Now let me just say this. I'm not trying to come with a judgmental thing right now or a self-righteous thing. This is all a process for me. Okay, and no one should be leaving here feeling judged. This is a provocation and a challenge, really, to get ourselves thinking about what it means when we say, "Yep, Jesus is King." I am making myself an ally. All right, I am drawing allegiance with that King. That's a political choice, by the way, which has social, spiritual consequences and realities positively. Okay. So you call me Lord, so why do you not do what I say? Yeshua wasn't interested in that. And there's another comparable passage at the end of his Sermon on the Mount, which I don't have here, but I'm just going to call it to mind, when he says, many will come to me on that day, saying, Lord, Lord, right? But will not enter the kingdom of which we speak, won't see it. They won't experience the resurrection that will provide them access into that kingdom, the first resurrection that the Apostle John speaks of in the book of Revelation. He said, and they respond, but Lord, we did such and such. We healed people. We prophesied in your name. We did all these things. He said, move from me, you who practice lawlessness. You didn't keep the law. That's his response. That's what it says. Honestly, this is literally what it says in Matthew. Okay. I don't want any of us to have that response. We can do many things here, and then yet we'll still get that response. And that's what that reality is. We did all of this stuff, but Yeshua was like, yeah, but you missed the point. You didn't actually do what was instructed to be done. You didn't keep the commandments. All right? It's a big deal. All right, not just for us, not just about entering the kingdom, because following Yeshua's instructions, following the instructions ultimately of God, is what will make this world the place that it ought to be. Whilst you and I are doing what we're doing, it's funny, science knows this. They use this language as well. Like they talk about natural laws and the laws of physics, and I love that. And that's inherent in the Hebrew language as well. Okay, this idea of, the universe being bound by specific laws and so on so much, okay? And when we think on that level, whilst we're doing what we're doing, I hope you realize that for the most part, everything in the universe, the planets, the stars, the moons, different aspects of nature and the environment, and so on, they are following the laws of the universe that God put in place at the beginning. Now, imagine if the sun decided to say, do you know what, I'm going to do my own thing today. Forget giving light today. I'm not on that thing. I'm atheist now. Yeah, that's the end of the world, our solar system at least, as we know it. Okay, everything has an assignment. Right? God has instructions. God has the guidance, the direction, the directives for everything, every created thing, every creature in this universe. Our job and responsibility is to acknowledge that reality and to adjust ourselves within the boundaries of that reality. All right? And I've said this before, let your fridge be a fridge, don't turn it into a microwave. Okay? Fulfill the role that we're supposed to be, okay, in society, as human beings, as men, as women, if we're married, as husbands, as wives, as we are all, some shape or form, children, as parents, as employees, as employers, and so on and so much. And whatever we do our work heartily as unto the Lord, okay? All right, but you catch my drift. Holiness. I'm going to say righteousness. We need to get to holiness again. But thank you for raising that. There's so much to do. Yes, of course. No, you're right. You're definitely right. That is living according to, yes, there is a sense when that is holiness. You're completely right. But holiness also involves other things too that don't have to do with actions, which I generally, with our Christian tradition, I don't think we're very that much aware of, but it's important stuff, okay? But anyways, yes, Ennis is always provoking me, all right? But it's good provocations, I like it. Psh, psh. It's like, yeah, cool, don't worry, we're gonna go there. All right, don't watch me, it's the coffee, yeah? All right, let's continue. So, knowing the King. So as we just said, Yeshua is a descendant of David. He's the Davidic king. He's the rightful heir to David's throne. All right, and that's what makes him the Messiah. Okay, that he is a descendant of David. Okay, so let's look at some examples of this. So in Luke chapter 1, verse 32 to verse 33, it says, this is in the so-called nativity scene when Gabriel, the angel, comes to Miriam, the mother of Yeshua, and delivers this message. And part of the message is this: he will be great and he will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, father meaning ancestor, all right? Give him the throne of his father David. Did David actually have a throne? Like an actual throne? A palace? A throne? Does the queen have one? Yeah. Yeah? Did Jesus ever sit on David's throne? Did that ever happen? Ever? No. All right. Okay. That's why the second coming of Yeshua is very important for Christian teaching and Christian tradition. If Jesus doesn't come back, our whole premise that he's king fails like that. And you know what? Let's shut up shop, close doors, and let's, as Paul says, let's eat, drink, party, and sleep, and do our thing, because everything that we've just stood for is not true. Yeah? And I want you to understand that God is true. God is the true reality. God is the only true reality. Jesus does exist. All right? That's not just a matter of faith, it is, but there is historical evidence making it clear that Jesus, this is not even a question of contention today. Jesus existed, all right? And there's good evidence that Jesus came from the dead, all right? Came back from the dead, all right? And we're going to look at that at some point too, in terms of things that we can really go around, because not only do we want us to grow in understanding here, we want to help you articulate that. All right, we want to have sessions that will help. How do I say this to my colleague? If they're coming from this angle and they ask me this question, how can I, as Peter says, be ready in season, out of season, ready to give a defense for the hope that you have? We need to be able to do that. Otherwise, we're gonna mess up our witness, so to speak. Okay, we need to be ready. Doesn't mean we need to be know-it-alls. Doesn't mean we need to know everything before we start speaking. But we need to make sure that we have some of the key basic details and know how to articulate them so that when others come to conversation with us, we don't misrepresent the reality. All right, because that could potentially throw them aside in joining into the very thing that they actually need. Okay, it's that important. Okay, so real throne. Real ancestor David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob, which is a reference to the nation of Israel, the Jewish community, and his kingdom will have no end, which is, think of, it will have no end. In that time, in that day, and even today, empires and kingdoms come and go, okay, until when they're usurped by another or invaded by a foreign ruler, or the kingdom or the empire just erodes like the Roman Empire and so on. Not the case with this one. This kingdom there's no kingdom after this that's going to challenge or usurp this one. That's the understanding. Okay, but it's his father David's throne. Okay, that's the key thing. Acts 2, verse 29 to 30, Peter says this on Shavuot, Feast of Weeks, the day of Pentecost, whilst all the Jewish people are congregated at the temple for the festival. He says, "Brethren, I may confidently say to you regarding the patriarch David that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. And so, because he was a prophet, David, and knew that God had sworn to him with an oath to seat one of his descendants on his throne." Okay? And Peter goes on to make it clear that descendant is who Peter recognized and understood to be his rabbi, Yeshua from Nazareth. Okay? So, Yeshua, this is the thing. Bear with me here. This is a whole chunk of information I'm about to give to you. All right? So, Yeshua is a physical descendant of David. Okay? Physical. All right? Which means he carries the genes and the DNA of King David. All right? I don't want to emphasize this too much, because sometimes when you emphasize it too much, it's like you're having to make a big old argument. This isn't an argument. This is just basics. Jesus carries within his biological structure, okay, anatomy, however you want to term it, Jesus carries the genes and the DNA of King David, okay? Otherwise, he wouldn't be a descendant, okay? He wouldn't be a descendant. This is the only way that you're a descendant. Adoption is not in view here. When it says one of your descendants, in the Hebrew it says your seed. Okay? Your seed. No one is ever, just to show you how it has to be that Jesus has a biological connection to David. He has to. Because there is, in no sense, in general kingdoms and monarchies, you're never adopted into a king position. And that is not the case in biblical law. You're not adopted. All right? You couldn't be from the priestly tribe. The priestly tribe. You could, if you was a priest in Israel, and you could only be a priest if you was a son or from the tribe of Levi, but more specifically, you was a descendant of who? Aaron, for the sake of time. Okay, you had to be a physical descendant of. Now, if one of those priests adopted another Jewish boy from like the tribe of Judah into his family, he can't officiate as a priest. It doesn't work. He's a member of, the priest has adopted him, he's an adopted son, and he's got full status within that family. He's just from another tribe. He can even be a foreigner, right, and he can come in. But he can't be a priest. You have to be, you can't be adopted into that station, okay? So this is not because some people teach that Jesus, some had some adopted state. No, there's no adoption. Jesus is a biological descendant of David, because it was, as Danny said, it was predicted that David's biological descendant would sit on his throne. Okay? Why is this all relevant again? Because when Jesus comes back, the world is going to be a different place. And we are part of that responsibility to get other people to acknowledge that reality and to prepare the world for that common reality. It's a big thing. Like, we should be looking forward to the establishment of this. I am. Sometimes when I get really frustrated with society, I'm just like, Lord, send Jesus. That's where I'm at. I've been like this for a good few years. I have hopes, I have aspirations, short-term goals, some long-term goals, but ultimately when my frustrations kick in, and it's not just when my frustrations kick in, but when my frustrations kick in, I'm like, this is long. Why am I sitting down here arguing this? God, just send Jesus, and then that's the end of the discussion. It's the end of the discussion. Let's bring this thing in. But God, let the Lord have his will. Let the Lord have his way. The Lord is patient, giving time for humanity to do its thing, all right? But we're progressing towards the goal. This is important stuff. We're all looking for this world to become a better place. And I'm letting you know that you have the key of understanding of how this world is going to become a better place. And you have a responsibility in helping this world become a better place through your own acknowledgement of the gospel and your participation in the gospel as you live it out, all right? And as you draw other people into the realities of that gospel message and change lives, all right? Seeking first the kingdom. So this is important stuff, just reminding you. So Jesus is a genetic, biological descendant of David. He carries his genes, he carries his DNA, which means that Jesus is a human being in the fullest sense of the matter, okay? Now, I don't think I need to describe a human being to anybody here, do I? No, all right, cool. I say this because everything that we know and take for granted about being a human being gets thrown to one side as soon as we start talking about Jesus. All of the assumptions that come with, oh yeah, I saw this person the other day, great man. We can make all of the assumptions about this person. He had parents, he eats, he sleeps, he's subject to ailments and sicknesses. But all of the stuff that we associate with the common, universal human experience, those assumptions are there. But as soon as we come to Jesus, the assumptions and the realities of him being a human being are cast aside. And I think that's one of the reasons why we can't really accept his Davidic lineage so well. Okay, but let me progress. I'm probably getting a little bit ahead of myself. I do have conversations with people through other Bible classes that I do and have done, and colleagues and stuff as well. People who used to be Christians who have left the Christian faith, but I like to speak to them and sometimes check to see, what is it that you actually left? Yeah? Was it what the Bible actually said? Because you probably didn't leave the Bible, you probably just left your denomination. This is another thing, okay? So I have conversations, but whether it's to Christians or non-Christians, the more I listen to people talk about Jesus, it becomes quite clear, quite quickly, that they don't, in any real sense, consider Jesus to be a human being. The underlying things that make human beings are either ignored or rejected when it comes to Jesus. So as I was just saying, for instance, every human being that has been born has a biological father and a biological mother, right? But it's perfectly fine for Christians to maintain, without any consideration of the consequence of this, that Jesus doesn't have a biological father, okay? And I know why people have an issue with that. It's because of how they read, not what's written, how they read Matthew, okay? Mark and Luke, for that matter as well. Jesus, if someone doesn't have a biological father, yeah, and yes, I know the gospel accounts, I know about the Immaculate Conception, I know about that, I grew up on it, I've done a nativity play, but I've also taught on this in recent years. Yeah, I think I might have even been Joseph, a black Joseph, time ago, all right? So I know the story, okay? Joseph didn't have intimate relations with his wife, all right? In the process of begetting Yeshua. That's fact. We know this, okay? Nonetheless, he is still a biological descendant of David through Joseph. That's what the Bible presents, okay? Not going to get into that today, but if Jesus doesn't have a biological father, if someone doesn't have a biological father, they're not human. Fact, right? Do you know, by the way, today, there are many accounts, all right, of people having, I wasn't intending to go down this road today, but I know people are going to be thinking it. So Do you know today, there are many instances, today, right now, where children are born without the act of copulation? Yeah, I'm wording my words specifically. All right? Without the physical act of copulation. Do we know that that's a reality today? That that children are actually born without that act. All right? So you need to think about that. All right? Because this shows you that this is scientifically possible for that to happen. It's just a miracle. But we're still talking. Sorry, forget the miracle. That's 2,000 years ago. But in these instances, we talk about IVF. Okay? In these instances, and I'm a big supporter of IVF because I believe the Bible is a big supporter of things like IVF. So when it comes to things like IVF, in all of these instances, without the act of copulation, there is still a biological father and still a biological mother. So there is a way to have a biological father and biological mother without the act of copulation that's still scientifically true. I've done teachings on this already, like years ago, back in 2019, okay? Fact of the matter is, Jesus is a biological descendant of David through Joseph. That's what the Bible presents, okay? Bear with me here, because I know minds are thinking, and we're going to start rehearsing passages in our head, and I get that. But my purpose today was not for us to get into that specific thing. We can talk, hit me up, but as I said, I do have a teaching on it, and we will revisit the subject. And I'm going to say that again in a second. So let me continue. So as soon as we talk about a human being, they have a biological father, they have a biological mother, they have a biological father. All right? But when it comes to Jesus, it's perfectly okay for him to not have a biological father, just a biological mother, and God as his biological spiritual father? Okay, that's Greek, and that's how Hercules was made, by the way. Demigods of the Greek pagan faith. Okay. Human beings are not born with an adult level education. Am I right? Is everybody with me? Have I got everybody's focus? Human beings are not born with an adult level education. They have to be taught and they have to learn. Is that not a general assumption? Yeah? All humans suffer from sicknesses from time to time. Yeah? Is that true? Okay. So if we think that Yeshua never got the sniffles, a sore throat, a headache, or any other common human ailment, then the Jesus in our mind is not the Jesus of the Bible, and it's not the Jesus of history. All right? Because these are just general realities of it. In fact, if Jesus didn't ever, if someone never got a sickness, if a human being never got a sickness, isn't that something that would be spoken about in any forum, news? The humans never. If the disciples knew that their rabbi had never had a sickness, never had a typical human ailment once, ever, do you believe they would have made a big point and deal about that? You have to say that. You know, you have to. The reason why they said that Jesus rose from the dead is because no one had ever done that before. This is what people need to know this. Okay, they've never seen someone calm a storm like that before. People need to know this. If their master, their rabbi, had never had a headache, do you know what Jesus? That's going to be in there. Yeah. That's going to be folklore for his disciples for the rest of time. Our rabbi never got sick. Okay, but that's a common experience of reality of human experience. Okay, and so it is true of Jesus too. There would have been times when Jesus would have woken up on the wrong side of the bed, feeling a bit irritable on one particular day. And this is why he becomes more relatable, because when it talks about that he felt our things, he had those weaknesses. He understands what Jesus understands. He knows what this is. He knows this. He's done it. He knows what it's like. He knows the human experience because he's a human. All right? I think the reason why the full appreciation of Yeshua being a human being is a mental stumbling block for many is because people have been overexposed to Western philosophical methods in the attempt to understand first century Jewish spiritual concepts. Okay, we're using modern philosophical or modern Western philosophical approaches and philosophies and ideas and methods of interpretation in trying to interpret things in our Bible, but those things in our Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were written by Jews who didn't grow up with modern Western philosophical ideas. They grew up as Jews in the first century with Jewish concepts of spirituality and morality and the like. Okay, so they thought within that. Okay, if you go to different parts of the world, the concept of spirituality, the concept of morality, the concept of ethics, the concept of politics will change because there are cultural differences. This is true of the Jewish people too, and it's within that worldview that Yeshua was born and raised, and which the apostles wrote and discussed with others. Okay, so I think that's part of the reason. We're using those approaches to reading things that are in the Bible, and therefore we misunderstand some of the spiritual realities that the apostles claimed Yeshua had. And we come to this statement, this oversimplified statement, which says this: Jesus is God. Just like that. That 3 words. Yeah? Jesus is God. Right? And that is an oversimplification of many verses in the New Testament, right? When it talks about Jesus and so on. Right? What is that anyway? When people say Jesus is God, even if that statement was true, because it is a misrepresentation of what actually is written, okay? But let's just think about it. Even when someone says Jesus is God, what does that actually even mean when someone says that? Let's consider some basic fundamental aspects that represent the God of the Bible, all right? According to the Bible, biblical revelation, God is, you can help me with this, God is all-knowing, He's all-powerful, all-present. Okay, so omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. Immutable, God doesn't change. It's another aspect of his reality description of his nature. All right. So God could do everything within the nature of his person. All right. I.e., all powerful. God knew everything, past, present, and future. All right. And there is nowhere where God isn't, so to speak. All right. Yeshua was none of those things. That's what's God. That is, those are the attributes of God. All right, in a nutshell, so to speak. Yeshua wasn't everywhere at the same time. Yeshua was not all-knowing, and Yeshua was not all-powerful. And that's what we know. That's why we say our God is God. There's no God like our God. This is God. Only God has those attributes. It's true. Yeshua had none of those attributes. So when we say Jesus is God, what are we actually even getting at anyway? That he's all-powerful? That he's all-knowing? That he's all-present? None of those things. But people might say, oh, but Jesus did miracles. So did Moses. So did Moses. I would actually argue that Moses did some pretty much more emphatic miracles at times than Jesus did. That's not heresy. That's like, the Red Sea is a big deal. Yeah? Striking a rock and water coming out and it feeds the whole nation of people in the wilderness. Yeah. That's a big deal. Okay? Don't underestimate Moses. There was never, ever another prophet like Moses. The Bible says this. Okay? Yeshua compares to that. All right? But Moses did miracles too. But someone might say, oh, but he knew what people were thinking, right? Jesus knew what people were thinking. Yeah, that's called a word of knowledge. It was one of the spiritual gifts that Paul mentions in Corinthians. In fact, the Apostle Peter exhibited this same spiritual gift too in that reputable episode with Ananias and Sapphira. He knew things that didn't come from normal human understanding and knowledge. It was spiritually conveyed to him, things that he wouldn't have known naturally. Peter could, I didn't say Peter could do that, Peter experienced that, a word of knowledge. So did just like Yeshua. It's not to do with being divine. Oh, but he brought people back from the dead. That's proof that he's God, right? So did Elijah. That's old news. Okay? Do you know what all those people had in common, including Yeshua? Do you know what they all had in common? Well, several things. That's a bit of a wide. You say relationship with God, yeah, but what's they were called, not the answer that I'm looking for. The Spirit of God. The Holy Spirit. Thank you. The Spirit of God. Okay? Feel free to speak. I'm not going to shut anyone down if it's not the answer I'm looking for, so thank you for your contributions. The Spirit of God. The Spirit of God. Okay? That's the one thing that they all had in common. Moses, Elijah, Elisha, Saul, etc., etc. All right? And here's a question anyway. Why would God's Spirit need to rest on God? It's kind of superfluous. It's like, why? God needs his Spirit to rest on him? No. Look, whatever miracle Yeshua did was done through the agency and the empowerment of God's Spirit, not through his innate divine nature. And then his miracles were not there to confirm or to validate his identity as God. That wasn't the purpose of those miracles. And that's why there is no record of Yeshua doing a miracle until he was baptized. He went into the wilderness, right, because the Spirit descended on him. Right, so he received the endowment of God's Spirit when he came up out of the water, when he was immersed by his cousin, Yochanan, John. Goes into the wilderness, and then he's commissioned to go and preach the gospel. And from that moment in the gospel accounts and records, Yeshua begins to do miracles. All right? There was a movie some years ago, like when it's like Jesus as a baby and as a young boy doing all these miracles. I'm like, no. Can you imagine? His brothers and sisters would have been believing in him as the Messiah from a long time ago. They didn't believe he was the Messiah, even despite all the miracles. They didn't believe he was the Messiah, yet alone God. Oh, do you know our brother's God, you know? Did you know that? Did he just use the bathroom? Did you see what God did in there? Anyways, all right. That was a little crude. But you get the point, okay? Nevertheless, because you're already there, all right? And yes, I do read my Bible, guys. I do. I've read it all, many times. And that's not a boast. It's just that I don't want you to feel that I haven't read something and there's, let's look, maybe Nathan hasn't seen this verse. I've seen that verse, okay? So let me say this. Nevertheless, despite all of, not despite, even with all that I've said, it is true that the teaching of the apostles does mention a mysterious spiritual quality that resides within the person of Yeshua. I'll say that again. According to apostolic teaching, there is mention of a mysterious spiritual quality that resides within the person of Yeshua of Nazareth. All right? That is in the Bible. Okay? That is apostolic teaching. And we're talking about a mysterious quality, spiritual quality, that can be described as divine. Okay? It's a divine, mysterious, spiritual quality. John, the Apostle John, refers to it as, you kids know, all right? But I'm not going to put you on the spot because we've gone through this, all right? And we've studied this a little bit. The Word. Okay? John refers to it as the Word. But if you read the first chapter of John, all right? And I'm not necessarily encouraging you to do it right now or anytime soon, but John goes through great pains in his first chapter, right? When he's talking about the Word, all right? He goes through great lengths to avoid the simple statement, Jesus is God. He could have opened up, in the beginning was God, or in the beginning was the Word, and no, in the beginning was God, God is Jesus. Boom, chapter 2. He doesn't do that. He goes through a whole statement, trying to get our heads around this thing that can sometimes be mind-boggling, okay? Because it's deep. It's like deep on a deep quantum physics spiritual level, okay? But he's trying to say, yes, this is connected to God, but this isn't God. So don't be confused. And he says it's the Word. So he lets you know, this is the Word. This is not who I mentioned. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. I'm not talking about God. I'm talking about the Word. It's a separate thing, okay? I'm not going into this today, right? But the statement that Jesus is God you would never find that in the Bible, ever. All right? The apostles go to great lengths to make sure they do not make that statement because it's not accurate. It's an oversimplification of apostolic teaching, all right, when it talks about this spiritual quality that Yeshua had. All right, so that statement is a gross misrepresentation of a very complex spiritual topic in Judaism that I've already spoken on before, which I don't have the time to get into today. I did spend some time in some classes on it about 3 years ago, and those recordings are still available. One of them was called The Logos. Okay, so you can have access to that. You already have had access to that, but from today, you can have access to that. Okay, I did a whole session dealing with what John's talking about there in terms of the Logos within a first century Jewish contextual understanding a few years ago. We will revisit again, okay, so if you don't get to listen to it for whatever reason, we will cover it again because it's important stuff. But suffice it to say that as far as the apostles were concerned, Yeshua was and is a real human being in every sense of the word. I don't even like saying things like, let's talk about Jesus' humanity. I don't like saying that statement because I feel like as soon as we say, let's talk about Jesus' humanity, then we're already kind of like implicitly contrasting his humanity with some other side of him. Like I don't talk about Idelia's humanity. It then suggests there's something. I don't like saying that because it's part of the problem, okay? Yeshua's spiritual nature forms part of the fabric of his human existence, just like every other human being. Every human being, Genesis reveals this to us, every human being has a spiritual quality and nature. Every human being. All right, we refer to this as the spirit of man, the soul. Okay, every human being has a spiritual quality that's immaterial, and the combined experience of physical body and a divine spirit is what makes us humans. That's what makes the human experience. Physical body from this world and an entity that's not from this universe, that comes from God, divine spirit, from within himself, the breath of God, all right? Neshama, it says in Hebrew. That combination is what makes a human, the combined experience of physical and spiritual coming together, and it's what makes humans different to angels. All right, so Yeshua's spiritual anatomy and quality is unique, yes? But his spiritual quality doesn't in any way diminish or subtract from his real human experience any more than our spiritual nature subtracts from our real human experience. But as I said, that's a subject for another occasion. There was no way for me to go through this talking about the king without dealing with that. Do you know what I'm saying? But it's not really what I want to talk about today. Okay, how long have I been so far? Okay, let me see where we stand. Okay, I'm going to go on for another 10 minutes and we'll see where we are then. And then we might have to continue next week. All right? All right. So once again, and for the final time today, Yeshua is a real human being. All right? He's a real human being. Okay? Physical body, spiritual nature, human experience, a unique quality with the logos, but, you know, we all have that spiritual, physical quality. Yeshua is a real human being, okay? And nothing of that mysterious spiritual quality that he has, that's unique, that's divine, contributed to the miracles or his ethics or his morals. All that he did as we all do, from his own choice and will and action to do it. All right? To say anything else would make the whole concept of following Jesus a really, really ludicrous idea. How can we follow someone who's completely different to us? Like, how can you emulate? Jesus tells us, be perfect, follow me, do what I do. Take up your cross, follow me. How can you do that when you're already starting at a deficit? That Yeshua's already got a superior quality that you don't have. How does that work? How does that possibly work? Does it? Anyways, I'm playing that same game. Let me move forward. Okay, where are we? So, where am I? The Jesus of history. So with the understanding that Yeshua was and is a real person and not an angel or a spirit or a demigod that's like half God and half mortal, half man, half immortal, half mortal. All right, so understanding Yeshua is a real person, a real human being, comes the understanding that one, he has a physical identity, and two, he was a man informed by his time, culture, and society, just as all people are. Is there any such thing as a human being that is not informed by the society, culture, and the time that they're living in? Is that true? Is that true of anybody? No. It's an assumption that we know of the human experience. Okay? As for his physical identity, we've already briefly touched on this earlier, that Yeshua is a descendant of David. Because of his Jewish mother, Miriam, Yeshua has Jewish nationality. Okay, if that's the right way of saying that. Jesus is a Jew. His nationality is Jewish. Right? Legally, he is a Jew. Nationally, he's a Jew. Okay? So he's a Jew that's also the rightful first in line heir to the throne of King David because of his ancestry. And according to the gospel accounts, Yeshua was acknowledged by the Jewish community, the society of his day, as a rabbi. So if we could, actually I've got this actually here, so if you can make that out, Mark chapter 9 verse 5, it says this: Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." John chapter 3, verse 1 to 2. Now there was a man of the Pharisees. Ooh, the Pharisees. Anyways, named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews, high station within the Pharisaical sect and within Jewish society. Listen to his recognition. He's not even a disciple of Yeshua at this moment. He does become one later. But he says, this man came to Jesus by night and said to him, "Rabbi." So this is not even one of his own disciples. This is someone who's from another, who's from the Jewish community, but not part of Yeshua's school of disciples. Right? "Rabbi, we know," he's referring to the Pharisaical sect. We know, one from the Pharisees, "we know that you have come from God as a teacher." The Pharisees knew this, okay? "For no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him." Notice that? See how Nicodemus signs? He knew that he was a teacher that has come from God because of his miraculous signs. Not that, "Oh my gosh, you're God." That's not what Nicodemus was saying. "Rabbi, we know that you have come from God." "Rabbi," John 9, verse 1 to 2. "As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind?'" So let me ask you a quick question. Is Yeshua a rabbi? Yeah? Correct. Okay. Okay. Did we know this? Is this something that we knew? Like when we were like in your early, for me, I didn't really know this in my early years. Some Bible readers would have known it. Is there anybody who, like me, didn't know this in their earlier years as a Christian? Is there anybody that can, yeah? One of my colleagues who has left the Christian faith and is quite antagonistic towards the Christian faith because of what she feels misdirected her, sadly, which isn't completely untrue as a reality. When I was saying, because she was in Christian circles and in church and quite active as well for about 10 years or so, 11 years, throughout teenage years into early 20 years of adult life and so on. When I was saying to her, I was like, you know, Jesus was a rabbi. She was like, no. She knows she's been in church. She's like, no, what are you talking about? What are you doing? I was just like, I said, look, and I was trying to give her, a verse to show her, and she was adamant that that must be my translation. The New American Standard Bible. She's like, let me go and get mine, yeah, King James or whatever it was that she had, because this must be some some messianic Bible that Nathan has that's kind of changed it. But go on, check it. Go and look at it. Whichever version you want. Besides like NLT, these modern ones that try to tone it down. Okay? These modern ones try to tone it down. But, go to King James. Go to the beloved King James if you want. Come back to me. Well, it wasn't that long. She had to read. She was surprised. Right? That's already a seed in my conversation. That's already a seed. I'm not just going to jump on it. But at that moment, she's like, look, let me show you another one. I said, exactly. I said, and I asked the question, so when you left, did you know that? So what did you leave? What understanding of Yeshua did you actually leave? Have you actually denied the truth, or what was told to you have you left? It's not necessarily the same thing, okay? There's a lot of people that don't know this, okay? But just as there are assumptions that come with the term human being, and just as there are given assumptions that come with the term king, that we just know that this is what a king is, lineage, monarchy. This is what a human being is. We described that earlier. So comes the very normal assumptions with a rabbi. As soon as we start to talk about a rabbi, what do we think? Do we think a traditional Christian pastor or vicar? Are those the things that come to mind? No? No? Yeah? Anybody? No? Okay. No. All right. As soon as let's bring up this next slide, and I'll end with this. The title rabbi informs us about Yeshua's religious associations straight away. And this was the effect it had on my friend, because she's no longer reading the Bible biased with her own kind of like whatever Christian perspective she had. She doesn't really care what the Bible says now. She doesn't believe whether all of it is true, but she's looking at it and she's reading it. It's like, oh yeah, it does actually say that now. And she's recognized, oh, well then if he's a rabbi, then hold on, what does that mean? What does that involve? Okay? The title rabbi informs us about Yeshua's religious associations. To be specific, it lets us know what Yeshua's religion is. Do I have to, if I went into a school, do you think it would take long for me to ask? Children, if it was to ask your friends at school, some of your friends, I saw a rabbi, would they know what religion that's associated with? Would they know that? You don't know. That's fine, you don't know. Well, you're starting RE in year 7 now, right? I'm going to ask you again in a few months' time. That didn't work, nevertheless. But the reality is, you go around and you ask somebody, Rabbi, we know what this involves. We know what this means. There are general assumptions. However, having said that, there are things about rabbis that we don't know. Do we know that? Are we aware of the fact that we already assume that we do know everything about what a rabbi is and does? No, because if you didn't grow up learning it, you're not going to know. Okay, so there are some things we might know from social familiarities, but there are other things that we don't know. But the gospel writers think that we would know because they don't take the time to explain what this is all about. Okay? All right, so it informs us what his religion is. All right? If you didn't know, all right, Jesus grew up in first century Judaism. Okay? First century Judaism. That was the religion of Jesus. It continues to be the religion of Jesus. Jesus never set foot in a Pentecostal church, a Baptist church, a Catholic church, a Protestant church. Jesus is not familiar with the custom of going to a community on a Sunday or any of those things. I'm not saying any of these things are bad things, by the way. I'm just making comparisons, okay? Jesus' experience is very different to the traditional, modern Christian experience, okay? If he was here today, he would find it very alien to what he knew, okay? This is historical reality, all right? The fact that Jesus grew up in the Jewish tradition, in the Jewish religion, the religion of Judaism in the first century, is even more evident when we are informed about the fact that he attended the synagogue every Sabbath, as was his custom. It says this in Luke chapter 4, verse 16. I don't think I need to go there, all right, but we've read this before. It says that Yeshua went to the synagogue, entered the synagogue, on the Sabbath, as was his custom. It was a regular thing. Now, as soon as we talk about Jesus going to a synagogue, has anybody been to a synagogue before? Yeah, you've been. There's a couple, I know there's a few people that have been to a synagogue. Am I right to assume that at least half of us have not been to a synagogue before? Are we familiar with a traditional synagogue service or synagogue, or the functions or the realities of what takes place in the synagogue community? No. But this is what Yeshua's reality was. He was a regular participator and attender of the synagogue community. All right? And this becomes even more evident. The point before. When we are informed about the fact that, where am I actually? So, where am I? Yes. Yeah, that he attended the festivals celebrated and observed in Judaism. So, like in John, if we can do this very, very, very quickly, actually, Josh, and I'll end on this. If we go to John chapter 2, verse 23. Great. John chapter 2, just get the next one ready if you can as well. That's going to be John 5, verse 1. John 5, verse 1. Now, when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover during the feast, many believed in his name, observing his sign which he was doing. So, Jesus went to Passover, okay? This was he did this every year. All right, if you go to John 5, verse 1. After these things, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. John 7, verse 14. But when it was now the midst of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and began to teach. I asked you last week, I said, do you know how we know that it's 3 years, that Jesus' ministry? No one was able to give me the answer. The reason why we know it's 3 years is because when we studied the Gospels, we can see how many festivals Jesus attended. And we know which ones they are. Now, this is what we call historical context. Okay? If we didn't know that, we'd just think Jesus might have been there for a year, 2 years, whatever. No. But once we know how the annual feasts work, then we now know. Now, scholars have known this for time because they have actually studied this, right? Regardless of whether they believe Jesus is, what we're teaching here now, right? Right? But that's the answer to that question from last week, all right? Jesus, we know it was about 3 years because we know the amount of times that Jesus attended Passover and the festivals as it's recorded from the moment he began his ministry, okay? So Jesus did these things, all right? I'm going to close with this here. So Yeshua's religious worldview, by worldview, the way that you view the world, the way that you understand life, the way that you understand this world, the way that you understand life in this world, that's what we mean about worldview when I use the term worldview. So Yeshua's religious worldview, the lens through which he understood things, all right, is Judaism. Christianity doesn't do any of the things that we just mentioned there. Passover, Sukkot, which is the Feast of Tabernacles, Rosh Hashanah, which is the Feast of Trumpets. In fact, Christianity actually teaches, this is the actual reality, if you didn't know, Christianity actually teaches, don't do those things. It tells you not to, all right? And it tells you if you do that, that's you trying to earn your righteousness yourself. It's legalistic. And then you have rejected what Jesus has come to provide. That's, in a nutshell, not every denomination will say it like that, but that's definitely Protestant, the general Protestant rhetoric and perspective. It's actually bad if you do this. Don't do that. What? You're going backwards. Don't do that. Don't do that, etc., etc. That is, I'm not lying to you. It's not just a trivial thing. It's part of the fabric of Christian theology. All right, you can go back to the earliest years of when it grew as a Gentile movement outside of the Jewish community, and go and check this for yourself. John Chrysostom, or you can ask me afterwards. He was from like the 4th century, and he berates. This was about 400 years on from the time of Jesus, all right, and the apostles, and he berates his community and the people in his church, all right, under his pastoring, whatever we would say that, because they were going to the synagogues and attending the festivals. 4 centuries, they will still do this. The Gentiles were doing this 400 years. And he's like, no, get out of that. This is a place of devils. You read it. It's a whole sermon saying, don't come out of the synagogue. All right? And this is part of how it veered away. All right? Church history, very important stuff. Very, very important stuff. Okay? Let me close. Yeshua's worldview was specifically within the sphere of first century Pharisaical Judaism. Okay? Yeshua did not subscribe to the Sadducean worldview. And the reason why I'm putting that out is because the gospel writers pointed that out to us. So it's important we know it because they thought it was important that we know it. So Jesus was not a Sadducee, and he did not subscribe to the Sadducean sect of Judaism's theological worldview. But he did affirm the worldview of the Pharisees. All right? Many Bible readers think that Jesus was opposed to the Pharisees, that they were his enemies and he had nothing to do with them. That is not the case. When we take a closer look at the Gospels, we will see that Yeshua observed Pharisaical customs. All of us here today, if we do this, do a custom that came through the Pharisees. There's more than one, actually, that we do. We are indebted. We do something because the Pharisees interpreted it this way, and we do it. And do you know what that is? When we say a blessing, or Thanksgiving, however Christians want to term it, before you eat your meal. That comes from, it's not even in the Bible, that comes from the Pharisees. The Pharisees, Jesus did that because he was part of the Pharisaical worldview. Okay? So if you sit down and you have your meal and you say some sort of thanksgiving, that comes from the fact when you go to the Gospels, it says that Jesus took the bread, all right, and he blessed it. Not blessed it, sorry. It says blessed it, italics in IT. He actually blessed. He issued a blessing just before he ate. So we're like, oh, that's what Jesus did. So we do it. So Christians have done it. But it's Pharisaical. It's a Pharisaical. And there's many others. Okay? If you attend a local place like this regularly, it's because Jesus went to the synagogue regularly. That's the Pharisaical thing. Okay? There's so many things we do from the Pharisees that we don't know. All right? The reason why people get into this misunderstanding of the Pharisees is because there are some kind of heated discussions that Yeshua had. But the reality is this. Yeshua took issue with some Pharisees because some of them were not staying true to their own Pharisaical worldview. They weren't maintaining their own Pharisaical standards that Yeshua held them accountable to, and that's why he says hypocrites. Hypocrisy means that you're saying something, but you're not doing it. There's no point calling out hypocrisy if you're not affirming that what they're saying is correct. The issue that you're taking is that you're not following the actual sentiment of what it is that you're supposed to be standing for. I take issue with that. He never had that discussion with the Sadducees at all. Didn't even get into it with them. All right? All right. So that's Yeshua's worldview, first century Pharisaical Judaism. I have to leave it there for today. I'm sad about that because there's more to be done, and I don't like leaving, right in the middle of things. All right, but we're not completely done. I will, we can have a moment of questions. All right. So we'll continue with what Yeshua the Rabbi means for us in a next session. Yeah.